Before the search dogs lost any trail of her in the frozen dark, and before investigators could piece together where she had gone, Maura Murray had earned her way into one of the most selective military academies in the country. She made the dean's list at her university, ran track, and had a boyfriend who loved her. And then, on the evening of February 9, 2004, somewhere along a dark stretch of road in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, Maura stepped out of her damaged car and walked into the cold night air, and she was never seen again. So who was Maura Murray? What was really happening in her life in the days before she disappeared? And what does the evidence actually tell us about where she went? Part 1. The girl who was built to survive. Maura Murray was born on May 4, 1982 in Brockton, Massachusetts. She grew up in the small town of Hanson, not far from the coast. She was the fourth child in an Irish Catholic family. Her father, Fred Murray, was a man who believed deeply in hard work, discipline, and finishing what you start. Her mother, Laurie, helped build a home where achievement was expected and effort was respected. From an early age, Maura showed the two qualities that would define everything that came after. She was fast and determined. She ran track at Whitman-Hanson Regional High School and was good at it. Not just good for her school good, but the kind of good that makes coaches pay attention and recruiters take notes. She trained hard, showed up early, and when other athletes were satisfied with where they were, Maura Murray was already thinking about where she needed to be next. Her grades matched her athletic effort. She was the kind of student who did not just pass her classes, but genuinely worked to understand them. That combination is what opened a door that very few young people in this country ever get the chance to walk through: the United States Military Academy at West Point. West Point does not accept just anyone. It is one of the most demanding colleges in the entire country, and getting in requires not just good grades and athletic ability, but letters of recommendation, a nomination from a member of Congress, and a willingness to commit years of your life to military service. Maura Murray was accepted. She enrolled, declared a major in chemical engineering, and began building a life that looked, from the outside, like it was heading somewhere extraordinary. But something happened at West Point that changed the direction of her life in ways that would still be felt years later. In August of 2001, during her time at the academy, Maura was caught shoplifting. It was a disciplinary and honor code violation, the kind that West Point takes with the utmost seriousness. Rather than face the full weight of those consequences, Maura made the decision to transfer. She left West Point after 3 semesters and enrolled at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where she changed her focus to nursing. It would be easy to look at that transfer and see only failure. But what happened next tells a different story. At UMass, Maura Murray made the dean's list. She worked hard in a demanding nursing program. She secured clinical rotations and built a new path forward from the pieces of a disrupted one. And yet, underneath that academic success, something was quietly building, a pressure that most people around her could not see. Part 2. The week everything changed. To understand what happened on February 9, 2004, you have to understand what the week before it looked like, because the days leading up to Maura's disappearance were not ordinary days. They were days stacked on top of each other like heavy stones, each one adding weight that a person can only carry for so long before something gives. It started on Thursday evening, February 5th. Maura was working her shift at a security desk inside a campus dormitory at UMass. It was the kind of quiet, routine job that college students take to earn a little money between classes, and then her phone rang. The call was from her older sister, Kathleen. Kathleen had recently been discharged from an alcohol rehabilitation clinic, and she was going through a painful and difficult time in her own relationship. What exactly was said during that call? No one outside of that conversation knows for certain. But whatever it was, it broke something open in Maura Murray that she had been working very hard to keep closed. At approximately 10:30 p.m. that night, Maura's supervisor found her at the security desk in a state that the supervisor would later describe as highly distressed and unable to respond normally. Maura was neither sick nor injured. She was somewhere else entirely, lost in whatever that phone call had brought to the surface. Her supervisor walked her back to her dormitory room at around 1:30 a.m. in the morning. When asked what happened, Maura offered only 2 words: "My sister." Now, here's something that investigators have never been able to set aside. During that same late night window, sometime between midnight and 1 in the morning on February 5th into February 6th, a UMass student named Petrit Vasi was struck by a car on campus in a severe hit-and-run accident. He was left in the road and was hospitalized in critical condition and placed in a coma. No witnesses came forward that night, and no vehicle description was available to police. The fact that Maura Murray suffered an emotional breakdown at almost the exact same time that a hit-and-run occurred within close proximity of her post has become one of the most debated and unresolved threads in this entire case. We will come back to it. But what we know for certain is this. After that night, the version of Maura Murray that her friends and classmates knew began quietly and methodically to prepare for something. Whether she knew what that something was, we cannot say. But the evidence she left behind makes one thing very clear. She was getting ready to leave. Part 3. The weekend before she disappeared. On Saturday, February 7th, Maura's father, Fred Murray, drove up to Amherst to spend time with his daughter and to help her solve a problem that had been growing more serious by the week. Her car was dying. Maura's 1996 Saturn sedan was running on 3 of its 4 cylinders. Its engine was burning oil and releasing a thick cloud of blue exhaust smoke every time she drove it. It was not a car that was going to last much longer, and both of them knew it. Fred and Maura spent that Saturday afternoon driving between dealerships in Hadley and Northampton, looking at used vehicles and trying to find something she could afford. They did not find the right car that day, but they spent the evening together in a way that felt normal and good. They had dinner with one of Maura's friends, a young woman named Kate Markopoulos, at the Amherst Brewing Company. Afterward, Fred and Maura bought some alcohol at a nearby store and returned to Fred's room at the Quality Inn before Maura and Kate left to attend a party on campus. Maura arrived at the party around 10:30 p.m. that night. She stayed until about 2:30 a.m. in the morning, and then, driving her father's Toyota Corolla back to his motel room in the early hours of Sunday, February 8th, Maura Murray struck a guardrail on Massachusetts Route 9 in Hadley. The collision caused nearly $10,000 in damage to the car. The responding officer filed an accident report, but did not give Maura a sobriety test or issue her a citation. She was driven back to her father's motel room, and the rest of that early morning passed in quiet. What happened next is important, and it is the kind of detail that investigators have had to think carefully about. At 4:49 a.m. in the morning, a call was made from Fred Murray's cell phone to Maura's boyfriend, Bill Rausch, an Army lieutenant stationed in Oklahoma. Who made that call and what was said during it has never been fully established. Later that Sunday, Fred dropped Maura off at her dormitory and drove back to Connecticut. That night, he called her to remind her to pick up the accident report forms from the Registry of Motor Vehicles so they could file an insurance claim together. They agreed to talk again on Monday evening. That conversation on Sunday night was the last time Fred Murray spoke to his daughter. Part 4. The Last Morning. Monday, February 9th, 2004. Sometime after midnight, Before the sun came up on Monday, Maura used her personal computer to search for driving directions on MapQuest. She searched for 2 destinations, Burlington, Vermont, and the Berkshires, 2 different places in 2 different directions, as though she had not yet decided which way she was going to go. At 1 in the afternoon, she sent an email to her boyfriend, Bill Rausch. It was a warm message. She told him she cared about him and explained that she had been quiet recently because of the stress she was carrying. She promised to call him later that day. 13 minutes later, she made a brief phone call to a nursing classmate, which investigators later understood to be about returning or exchanging a set of clinical scrubs. At 1:24 in the afternoon, Maura sent an email to her nursing school professors and her work supervisors. The email said she would be out of town for the next week because of a death in her family. But there had been no death in her family, meaning the email was a lie, deliberately crafted to buy herself time away from school and work, without anyone asking too many questions. At 2 in the afternoon, she called a recorded information line for lodging in Stowe, Vermont. The call lasted approximately 5 minutes. At 2:18, she called Bill Rausch and left a voicemail, again promising to speak with him that evening. At 3:30, she shut down her computer, gathered her things, and drove away from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. When campus police later entered her dormitory room, what they found was not the room of a young woman who had stepped out for days. The artwork had been taken down from the walls. Her clothing, textbooks, toiletries, and personal belongings had been packed into cardboard boxes and stacked neatly. On top of one of those boxes sat a printed email to Bill Rausch describing the difficulties in their relationship. At 3:40, she stopped at an ATM and withdrew $280, nearly everything she had available in her account. She then stopped at a nearby liquor store and spent $40 on alcohol, vodka, Kahlua, Bailey's Irish Cream, and a box of Francia wine. At 4:30 in the afternoon, she checked her voicemail for the last time. That call is the final recorded activity on her mobile phone. Somewhere between 4 and 5 in the evening, Maura Murray drove north out of Amherst, and what followed those moments became the most disturbing events ever heard of. Part 5. The Hairpin Turn. Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire is a narrow, winding road flanked on both sides by tall trees and walls of packed snow that build up over the winter months until they are taller than a person standing upright. In the daytime, it is beautiful in the way that remote places in New England often are. But at 7 o'clock on a February night, with no streetlights and a sky full of clouds blocking whatever moonlight might have helped, it is just dark. At approximately 7 o'clock in the evening on February 9, 2004, Maura Murray was driving east on Route 112, also called Wild Amonosik Road. She had been driving for roughly 2 hours since leaving the Amherst area. She was heading into a part of New Hampshire that she knew from childhood, a region of mountains and forests where her family had gone hiking when she was young. And then she reached the hairpin turn, a sharp, sudden curve in the road. Maura Murray's Saturn sedan left the road. The car struck something, spun around, and came to rest on the wrong side of the lane, facing the direction it had come from, and both airbags deployed. What happened in the next 46 minutes will become the most examined, debated, and disputed stretch of time in the entire history of this case. Part 6. The Witnesses. At 7:26 in the evening, a woman named Faith Westman heard a loud thump from inside her home, which sat directly beside the hairpin turn. She looked through her window and saw a dark sedan pushed against a snowbank on the wrong side of the road. She picked up her phone and called the Grafton County Sheriff's Department. During that call, she told the dispatcher that she could see a figure inside the vehicle, which she described as a man with a glowing red light. What she believed at the time was a lit cigarette. Later analysis would suggest that what Westman actually saw was the glowing screen of a mobile phone. A few minutes later, a school bus came slowly down Route 112. The driver was a local man named Butch Atwood, returning home after a long day of driving students. He saw the damaged Saturn sitting against a snowbank and pulled his bus to a stop alongside it. Atwood got out and spoke briefly with the driver of the Saturn. He would later tell investigators that she was a young woman, that she was cold and shivering, that the airbags inside the car had gone off, and that she appeared physically uninjured, though clearly shaken. He offered to call for help, but she asked him not to call the police, that she had already contacted AAA. Butch Atwood knew something that the young woman in the car apparently did not. There was no cell phone reception on that stretch of Route 112. If she had tried to call AAA from where she was sitting, the call would not have connected. He was skeptical of her answer, but he did not push the issue. He drove his bus the short distance to his home, approximately 150 yards down the road, and went inside to use his landline telephone. He tried to reach the sheriff's department, but the lines were busy. He did not successfully connect until 7:42 in the evening. During that window, the time between when Atwood drove away and when his call finally connected, something happened at the crash site that no official explanation has ever fully resolved. A woman named Karen McNamara was driving home from work on Route 112 that same evening. She passed the crash site twice. On her way by, she observed a Haverhill police SUV, a large marked vehicle numbered 001, parked nose to nose with Maura's Saturn. No one was standing outside and no officers were visible. The two vehicles were simply there, facing each other in the dark. McNamara anchored her timeline to a cell phone call she made at 7:52 in the evening, placing her passage of the crash site somewhere between 7:53 and 7:37 in the evening. Officer Cecil Smith of the Haverhill Police Department did not arrive at the scene, according to official dispatch logs, until 7:46. That is a gap of nearly 9 to 11 minutes, depending on which timestamps you use, during which a police vehicle that was not supposed to be there was reportedly parked at the scene of Maura Murray's accident. No one has ever explained it to everyone's satisfaction. When Officer Smith did arrive and recorded his arrival officially, he found the Saturn locked and empty. The driver was gone. He looked inside and saw a box of Francia wine on the backseat floor. He noticed a red liquid splattered on the driver's side door panel and across the interior ceiling of the car. He found a bottle containing a red liquid that had a strong alcoholic smell. He searched the road and the immediate area around the car and found no sign of the person who had been driving it. At 7:54 in the evening, he issued an alert for a missing female. By the time an ambulance and fire personnel arrived 2 minutes later to help search the surrounding road and forest, there was nothing to find. The woman who had been sitting, shivering in that car less than 30 minutes later had simply vanished. Part 7. What the car told investigators. When investigators examined the Saturn more carefully in the days that followed, the car told them a story that raised as many questions as it answered. The damage to the front end of the car was one of the first things that caught the attention of private investigators and accident reconstruction specialists brought in later to look more closely at the case. The official accident report described the Saturn as having gone off the road, struck some trees, spun around, and come to rest facing the wrong direction. But the pattern of damage on the front of the vehicle did not look entirely consistent with hitting a tree at that particular location. One private investigator described what he observed as override damage, the kind of damage that happens when one vehicle runs into the side of a taller, heavier vehicle like a truck or an SUV. That detail would later become relevant to more than one theory about what happened that night. Inside the car, investigators found what amounted to a snapshot of Maura Murray's life, packed and organized, and brought with her on a journey whose destination nobody had been told. There were boxes of personal belongings, nursing textbooks, and notebooks. There was a portable CD player and a case holding 34 compact discs. There were bottles of shampoo, a cosmetic bag, personal medication including a prescription for birth control, and a bottle of sleeping aids. There was a green garment bag, a black army duffel, and several shopping bags from grocery and department stores. Her clothing included a pair of Puma sweatpants, a sweater, and sneakers. She had packed for days, possibly longer. Among her possessions, investigators also found the book Not Without Peril, a collection of accounts about hikers and climbers who had encountered dangerous conditions in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. Maura had been reading about this exact region before driving into it. And then there was the rag. When the Saturn was towed to a local garage, the mechanic discovered a cloth stuffed tightly into the car's exhaust pipe. It was wadded up and pushed deep enough that it would not simply fall out on its own. When investigators asked Fred Murray about the rag, he had an answer. He had told Maura to put it there. Because the Saturn's engine was burning oil and releasing a thick, visible cloud of blue exhaust smoke every time the car was driven, Fred was worried that a passing police officer might pull her over on the highway simply for the smoke. Stuffing a rag in the exhaust, he explained, might slow it down temporarily. What he may not have fully considered at the time was that blocking an exhaust pipe builds back pressure inside the engine, which can force it to stall. It can also push carbon monoxide into the passenger cabin. But here's what the car's own data recorder showed. The Saturn's black box logged 7 separate attempts to restart the engine after the airbags deployed at the crash site. 7 times. In the minutes after the accident, someone turned the key, but the car did not start. Whether the rag contributed to those failed attempts, or whether the crash damage alone was responsible, the data tells us one thing clearly. Maura Murray sat in that car after the crash and tried to drive away, but she could not. That is when she got out and disappeared. Part 8. The Search. 2 days after Maura Murray vanished, on February 11th, law enforcement brought tracking dogs to the crash site on Route 112. The scent article they used was a pair of leather gloves recovered from the back seat of the Saturn. The gloves had been a Christmas gift from Bill Rausch. Fred Murray was not entirely sure Maura had ever worn them. Rausch insisted that she had, during the holiday break they had spent together. The dog picked up a scent and followed it east along Route 112, moving in the direction of the road, not into the woods. It tracked for approximately 100 yards before it stopped. Completely and without any gradual fading, the scent trail ended near the intersection of Bradley Hill Road, directly in front of Butch Atwood's home. To people who study missing persons cases, that kind of sudden clean stop means one of two things. Either the person entered a vehicle at that point, or the trail had degraded so severely in the cold and wind and road traffic that there was simply nothing left for the dog to follow past that point. So the scent trail ending at Bradley Hill Road may tell us exactly where Maura Murray got into a vehicle, or it may tell us nothing at all except that it was too cold, late, and too disturbed for the dogs to go any further. The physical searches that followed were extensive. Volunteers, cadaver dogs, helicopter teams equipped with infrared cameras, and professional search and rescue personnel covered a radius of 10 miles around the crash site, but they found nothing. In September of 2021, 17 years after Maura disappeared, human bone fragments were discovered during land clearing near Loon Mountain in Lincoln, New Hampshire, roughly 25 miles east of the hairpin turn along the same route she had been traveling. The discovery drew enormous attention from the public and from everyone who had been following this case for years. The New Hampshire State Police submitted the fragments for radiocarbon dating and DNA analysis. In November of 2021, the results were released and the bones belonged to someone who had lived and died somewhere between the years 1774 and 1942. They were historical remains, unconnected to any modern missing person. Part 9. The Theories. More than 20 years have passed since Maura Murray walked away from her car on Route 112. In that time, investigators, journalists, podcasters, and thousands of people who have never met her have studied every piece of available evidence and put forward theories about what happened to her. The first theory is the simplest and, in some ways, the most painful. Maura Murray, disoriented from the crash and desperate to avoid another police encounter after what had happened with her father's car, ran into the woods to hide. The temperature that night was well below freezing. If she ran into those woods in the dark, disoriented, she may not have found her way back out. This theory explains her state of mind. It explains why she asked Butch Atwood not to call the police. It explains why the book about dangerous mountain conditions was in her car. But it struggles with one critical fact. The snowbanks lining Route 112 at that location were deep and undisturbed. Officers and investigators who searched the scene noted no footprints entering the woods near the vehicle. A person crossing those snowbanks in the dark would have left marks. The second theory is the one that the physical evidence, taken as a whole, points toward most directly. Maura Murray walked east along Route 112 after the crash in the dark, trying to get away from the scene before police arrived. And in that narrow window of time, a vehicle came down that road and she got in. Whether she got in willingly because she needed help, or whether she was not given a choice, is the question that keeps this theory open. There's a piece of evidence connected to this theory that has never been resolved. A local resident named Robinson Ordway reported seeing an old red pickup truck with Massachusetts license plates and a wooden-sided bed sitting near a local shop on Route 112, approximately 1 mile from the crash site at around 7 o'clock that evening. The truck drove slowly past them. He watched it head in the direction of the hairpin turn, just before the emergency vehicles arrived. That truck was never identified, its driver was never found, and it remains, more than 2 decades later, the single most significant unresolved lead in the immediate area of Maura Murray's disappearance. The third theory suggests that the entire thing was planned, that Maura Murray did not disappear accidentally, but deliberately, and that the crash on Route 112 was staged to explain her absence. It gave her a reason to vanish without anyone immediately searching for her in the right places. But the evidence pushes back hard against it. If Maura was planning to start a new life somewhere, she brought her heavy nursing textbooks with her. She left herself with less than $300, and in the more than 20 years since February 9, 2004, her social security number has never been used. Her bank accounts have never been touched. No credible sighting of her has ever been confirmed anywhere in the country. A person who disappears voluntarily and successfully leaves a trail of some kind, eventually. The fourth theory involves the unexplained police vehicle. If Karen McNamara's account is accurate and she has maintained her account consistently for 2 decades, then a marked Haverhill police SUV numbered 001 was parked at the crash site before Officer Cecil Smith officially arrived. The discrepancies in the police logs, the tow records, and the vehicle assignment records for that night have fueled speculation that something happened at the crash site during the gap in the official timeline that was never properly investigated or disclosed. No physical evidence of police misconduct has ever been found. Officer Smith maintained until his death that he arrived at 7:46 and found the car empty. The state police and the FBI have reviewed the case and found no evidence of a cover-up. But Karen McNamara's testimony has never been convincingly explained, and the timeline gap has never been closed. So, what do you think about Maura Murray's disappearance? Was she kidnapped or killed? If you know anything about this case, the New Hampshire State Police Cold Case Tip Line remains active. The number is available in the description below. And if this video brought you closer to a story that has stayed with too many people for too long, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you are subscribed so you never miss what comes next.